Television Network.
China's economic growth remains stable, while progress is seen in other areas. Ethiopia steps up efforts to resolve the Kenya-Somalia maritime dispute. And flights resume at JKIA after a strike by aviation workers. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtogana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Zimbabwe opens up fuel imports to private companies to stem a supply crisis. And in sports, holders Real Madrid knocked out of the UEFA Champions League by Ajax Amsterdam. Well, let's start the hour with our continuing coverage of this year's two-sessions political season in China. The Chinese economy saw stable growth last year with improvements in several areas. That's according to China's top economic planner, the National Development and Reform Commission, or the NDRC. Its chairman, He Lifeng, said at a press conference that over 13 million new jobs were created and 13 million people were lifted out of poverty. In addition, he noted the stability of prices in China and its currency exchange rate. Mr. He also commented on the country's high-quality development and reforms. Let's take a listen.
We need to press ahead with supply-side structural reform and provide people with more high-quality products and services. To ensure the healthy development of our economy, we're taking measures to form a strong domestic market.
While an economic slowdown may be looming for China, economists are warning the world not to worry. China is slated for growth in 2019, but the figures just may not be as high as in recent years. CGTN reporter Tang Bo takes a closer look at this week's government's work report and the changes it will bring.
Bracing for a slowdown, Guangdong province deputies are deliberating the 6 to 6.5% economic growth target for 2019. The lower figure makes some worry following China's 6.6% annual GDP growth last year. The government work report predicts a slower pace as the nation aims to pursue a higher quality development.
For the past 30 years, the GDP of Guangdong province has ranked first among all Chinese provinces and regions in the mainland, and its economic volume has been growing as well. The next step is to build a modern industrial system, improve innovative abilities, and expand the export-oriented economy so as to realize higher quality development.
Premier Li Keqiang said Monday when delivering the government work report that China's development this year will face a harsher environment based on both domestic and international conditions. As one of China's manufacturing and foreign trade hubs, Guangdong province sits on the front line of mounting uncertainties in the world economy. The Greater Bay Area Development Plan, which covers a large part of Guangdong Province, Hong Kong and Macau, has offered the province a solid platform to reform and open up again in the new era.
Innovation, coordination, openness and sharing are the new ideas that will be implemented during the entire construction process of the Greater Bay Area. They will also help integrate the area into China's overall development strategies.
Many deputies from Guangdong province believe that the Greater Bay Area Development Plan will offer new driving forces for the region's higher quality development as it requires innovation, openness and sustainability. That they believe will create a model for the higher quality development across the country. Kambo, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, in recent years, China's two sessions has attracted widespread attention within the international community. Seen as a key guide to understanding China's domestic and foreign policy, The two sessions has become a key talking point among influential leaders across Africa. The chairman of the South African Independent Media Group, Dr. Iqbal Survey, said in an interview that his firm has always been concerned about the latest progress and achievements announced at the two sessions. He also expressed his appreciation for China's unwavering commitment to a peaceful development path and the pursuit of a mutually beneficial win-win operating strategy.
It has always tried to seek peace, and it has used peace as the basis on which to build a developmental state, and in fact focused on economic development in not just in China, but in related countries in Southeast Asia as well as in South America and Africa. So I think that quest for peace, which was a key component of the previous Congress and continues into this Congress, is what the world needs. In China, my understanding of everything that they're doing, it crystallizes to people come first. It's a per-people driven agenda. It's a people's economy, a people's democracy. And I think that is what is important, putting people first and not putting your interests first. And I think that is what makes China such a great place.
And let's turn to news now from East Africa. Somalia's President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed are due to hold talks with Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta on the Kenya-Somalia maritime dispute. The spat erupted into a diplomatic row last month when both countries recalled their envoys after Kenya accused Somalia of auctioning off oil blocks. Abiy, who hosted Kenyatta in Ethiopia last week, is said to have stepped up efforts to resolve the diplomatic dispute. Well, let's bring you more on this now. We're joined by CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo. He's with us from Mogadishu, and here in studio, we're joined by Dr. Hassan Kanenje. He's the director of the Horn Institute. Let's start with you, Abdulaziz, of course, there in Mogadishu. Now, we know that the leaders of these three countries, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya, are meeting in Nairobi for talks. Do you have any idea as to what is on today's agenda, and in particular, Somalia's role in these talks?
Well, Lindy, there's a statement that was released a while ago by Village Somalia, this top office of the President of Somalia. Now, in that statement, it indicated that Kenya and Somalia agreed to restore diplomatic ties after a tiff last month of a maritime dispute. And the way you've said, Kenya accused Somalia of auctioning oil and gas blocks in a disputed region along the Indian Ocean. So these talks are being mediated currently by the Ethiopian Prime Minister, who is also the chairman of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, Abiy Ahmed. He's in Nairobi alongside the Somali president to meet President Uhuru Kenyatta so that they can iron out the differences in diplomacy between Somalia and Kenya. Now, if we go back to the talks that happened today, according to the statement by the Office of the Somali President, the talks mainly focused on restoring diplomatic relations, as well as working on talking on trade and cross-border trade rather between Somalia and Kenya, and also regional security as well as cooperation. Now, what we know is Kenya and Somalia as well as Ethiopia, they all share long and porous border, and both countries, Kenya and Ethiopia, have troops in Somalia. So they see that any bad relation between Kenya and Somalia might in turn affect regional security and regional peace. They also talked about the fight against Al-Shabaab. Now, Kenya and Ethiopia are also contributing troops to AMISOM, and Kenya and Somalia bear the brunt of deadly militant attacks. So the leaders also emphasized on the need to work together to tackle the threat of Al-Shabaab in Somalia as well as in Kenya, where it has launched deadly attacks. So these talks might go on throughout the better part of the day, and we're expecting more information in the coming hours. But one thing to note, Lindy, is that the talks did not focus at all on the maritime dispute boundary, and the case is still at ICJ, according to Ministry of Somali officials, Minister of Foreign Affairs rather.
Right, well, let's get a little bit of background on that maritime issue. Dr. Kanenje, what started seemingly as a disagreement between Kenya and Somalia very quickly escalated into a diplomatic tit-for-tat row. Just talk us through what's at the heart of this dispute and essentially what's at stake here.
At the heart of this is who exactly controls the maritime area that we're talking about. Now, Kenya's claims are both historical as well as geographical, and is based on two presidential declarations from 1979 and 2005. And it holds that the determination should follow the parallel to the latitude straight line principle. But Somalia, on the other hand, it argues that we have to follow the equidistant principle, which of course in certain rulings has been made under by the International Court of Justice before. Now, this is something that there was an attempt between Kenya and Somalia to actually work on this before, but I think things at some point fell apart. And I think that is why Somalia elected to go to the ICJ, even though the good solution, the better solution would be a negotiated settlement.
And so coming back to you, Abdulaziz, it sounds like, you know, Kenya is quite firm on its position that this is a boundary that runs parallel to the line of latitude. What then is Somalia hoping to get out of these talks today? And essentially, perhaps just emphasize for us what is at stake here for Somalia.
Well, Lindy, Kenya, for one, wants to restore diplomatic relations with Kenya for all the right reasons, because one of that is they share a long and porous border, and also we have Kenyan forces operating as part of AMISOM. So Somalia rather sees Kenya as an integral part in regional peace and stability. Now, coming back to these talks regarding the maritime dispute, Somalia is of the view that the issue at hand is now before an international court of justice, and until the ICJ rules out, gives a verdict regarding this maritime dispute, Somalia insists that it is in no position and is not interested in auctioning or selling any oil blocks in that disputed maritime area. And to complete all this puzzle, Somalia is of the view that it is going to accept any outcome that will be granted by ICJ, whether it says the territory in question belongs to Somalia or Kenya. And it also wants Kenya to also respect any decision that the court might give. So coming back to these talks, Somalia specifically, what authorities want is Kenya to work alongside Somalia in terms of trade, in terms of security, and that the diplomatic row over this maritime dispute should not be a bone of contention that will create animosity between the two countries, because they share a lot in common. They share the same border, they share the same threat, and also the people living on both sides of the border are both Somali citizens, both in Kenya side and also on the other side. So they want cross-border trade to continue between the two countries, and Somali officials insist that they are not auctioning any oil blocks in that disputed maritime area. They want Kenya to respect the International Court of Justice verdict, and until that court case is heard, Somalia says that it will not take part in selling or auctioning of these oil blocks, and it wants Kenya to respect its verdict also.
And so, of course, the main focus then is about restoring diplomatic relations. Just talk us through, Dr. Kanenja, the regional significance of this meeting between the three leaders.
It's very encouraging that actually Dr. Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, is the one leading the process, in part because he's emerged as the diplomatic leader of the region. But Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, there's three sister countries that share common borders. They have invested heavily, especially in security and stabilization of Somalia, and they're facing a common problem of terror, especially from Al-Shabaab. The only way they can be able to stabilize Somalia and tackle the problem of terror is actually for them to work together. So this is a very good beginning, and I think is a good sign for the region and for Africa at large.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much, Dr. Kanenja, joining us here in studio, and a big thank you, of course, to Abdulaziz Billo joining us there from Mogadishu. Now turning to some other news here in Kenya, flights have resumed at Kenya's main international airport in Nairobi following a serious disruption as aviation workers went on strike early on Wednesday morning. The workers were protesting against unfair staff hiring, poor remuneration, and the proposed takeover of the airport by the loss-making national carrier Kenya Airways. KQ has now asked passengers whose flights were disrupted by the strike to rebook or reroute at no extra cost.
This was the scenarios at Kenya's main airport early on Wednesday.
I started from Mombasa this morning, 2 o'clock. I was supposed to connect going to London. And what I see is this one. When I arrived in Nairobi, I'm supposed to leave by now. I don't know what's going to happen next minute.
Most of us are not notified on the delays and any inconveniences that are coming up. And we also have inconveniences because if we are connecting on the other side, we are deemed to miss the flights.
Hundreds of passengers traveling to different destinations were stranded after aviation workers went on strike. The protesters were against a proposed merge of Airport Management Authority and the national carrier Kenya Airways. The process has, however, been suspended. Scheduled flights have resumed, but the strike is expected to have impact throughout the day, easing off in the evening as the airline counts its losses. The Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, JKIA in Nairobi, is East Africa's the busiest airline hub. Major global airlines use the Nairobi hub as a strategic link to other international destinations. Chamgono, CGTN.
Egypt, Tunisia and Algeria renewed their support for the UN-backed political roadmap for the crisis in Libya. Foreign ministers of those countries, however, stressed the necessity of supporting a unified Libyan armed forces. They believe it's a fundamental step without which Libya will never be unified under one government.
After a several months gap, the Arab Ministerial Committee of Libya's neighbors meet to discuss the recent developments in the troubled North African state. Egypt, Tunisia and Algeria are the most affected countries by the instability in Libya. On Tuesday, they expressed their frustrations over this elongated conflict.
We must speed up the political process to overcome the current crisis in Libya. It needs immediate assistance on the economic and security levels. The situation in Libya, unfortunately, has deteriorated further socially and economically. And when our three countries speak up in one voice for the Libyan people, that is necessary.
The meeting follows the latest announcement from the Libyan National Army, which claimed control over most Libyan territories in the south. LNA has been fighting terrorism in that lawless region in Libya since January. This week it says it has managed the borders with Niger, Chad and Algeria.
We want Libya to become capable of fighting terrorism and all forms of organized crime. Terrorism and organized crime grow in countries that have weak institutions. If Libya doesn't have a strong national army and institutions, they will grow in Libya. Foreign fighters will come. That's why we coordinate with the Libyan side to maintain security at our borders with them.
Despite their security coordination with LNA's head General Khalifa Haftar, the three countries reaffirmed their support to the UN-backed political solution and Security Council resolutions. The UN backs the Western government led by Faiz al-Sarraj, a rival to Haftar. Yet Libya's neighbors still believe that a unified army is key for that political process to begin.
The three countries are working effortlessly to unite all Libyan entities. There is no doubt that the security aspect is a priority. We focus the Libyan National Army, the patriotic foundation for Libya. It should be able to provide safety for the Libyan people. I can also guarantee the implementation of the political agreement, especially that part that concerns holding elections in the country.
After years of suffering from the instability in Libya, Egypt, Tunisia and Algeria want to speed up the political process. Their positions, however, didn't change much from last year when they failed to bring Libyans together for general elections. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, staying in the region, let's go to Algeria now, where tens of thousands have taken to the streets to protest against President Bouteflika's intent to run for another term in office. Demonstrations have been taking place in major cities since last month. In response, the country's army chief has pledged to maintain tight security. CGTN's Laura Walubengo has more.
Algerians are protesting against President Bouteflika seeking a fifth term in office. Demonstrations have reached critical mass, prompting authorities to increase security. Algerian Army Chief of Staff General Ahmed Gaid Salah has vowed to maintain stability.
These parties want to bring Algeria back to the painful years of embers, during which the Algerian people experienced all forms of suffering and paid a heavy price. The original Algerian people who lived through these hardships and suffered their torments cannot under any circumstances endanger their blessed security and tranquility.
In the latest display, thousands of students marched in the capital Algiers and other cities. They are demanding that the 82-year-old president resign. In power for 2 decades, Bouteflika suffered a stroke in 2013 and is rarely seen in public. He has been in Switzerland since February for what is described as routine medical tests.
We are aware that this continuous security and stability will become even more rooted, and the Algerian people will continue to enjoy this blessing. And the army will remain the guarantor of this dear achievement through which our homeland has regained its prestige.
General Salah is considered one of Algeria's most powerful figures. Close to President Bouteflika, the army chief also serves as the deputy defense minister. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, a breakthrough in HIV treatment as a second patient appears to be cured. And the UN deeply disappointed by the Burundi Human Rights Office shutdown.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Africa Centre for Disease Control says the recent news of a London man having been cured of the HIV virus gives them hope the disease could eventually be eliminated. But the medical body is warning this should not distract the continent from continuing with HIV prevention and treatment programs. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Over a decade ago, Timothy Ray Brown, known as the Berlin patient, was declared HIV-free after a cell transplant in Germany. Now, doctors in London say an unidentified man has been declared free of the disease after a bone marrow transplant. The African Centre for Disease Control says they are encouraged by the news that the disease may be curable, but much more research is needed.
Well, at the program level, this is not the time to talk about it because, one thing, those donors are very rare. You cannot get the donors, and bone marrow transplantation is a very risky, complicated and painful procedure. So we cannot discuss this as at a public health point of intervention.
Dr. Kebede says that Africa should stay focused on proven measures of fighting HIV/AIDS.
There will be some solitary reports here and there claiming that HIV has been cured, but that should not distract, countries to implement proven measures of HIV prevention, which is, preventing HIV, empowering women and girls, and increasing access to antiretroviral treatment.
Statistics from the World Health Organization show there are over 25 million people living with HIV in Africa. The African Union says many countries are successfully fighting the disease and have reached a stage where the epidemic is under control, with fewer new infections than the people living with HIV. UNAIDS maintains that the focus now should be on reducing new HIV infections and offering more flexible treatment options.
When I joined UNAIDS, and I want to share that, we were giving 18 pills a day to a sick person. We would have never, I said, reached 22 million people on treatment if we were not working with private sector to change completely the dynamic and to make sure that today we will be giving them only 1 pill a day. And soon it will be 1 injection every 4 months.
The new HIV cure may not be the magic bullet the continent has been waiting for, but it does raise much-needed hope. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's bring you more on this now. I'm joined here in our Nairobi studios by Jacqueline Mwangi. She's an advocacy and communications officer for NEPAC, a support network for those living with and affected by TB and HIV/AIDS in Kenya. Jacqueline, thank you so much for your time. This research or this announcement of a London man being cured of HIV, it's obviously something very significant, and especially for Africa when we think about the HIV/AIDS burden on this continent. But are you seeing this as the light at the end of the tunnel, or are you being cautiously optimistic?
I'd say cautiously optimistic because as much as there is a process for researching for the cure, this particular issue that happened for the London patients is something that we're looking at maybe a bit complicated, especially for sub-Saharan Africa, because of course the cost implications and so many other things in relation to bone marrow transplant may be a bit complicated. But for us, we're optimistic that we know that eventually there's a process for having a cure. It means that they will find a cure when we have now these two cases that have come up about the HIV cure.
So where, in your view, are we as Africa in terms of the strategies that have been adopted over the past few decades? Are we making headway in being able to eliminate HIV/AIDS, at least reduce the weight of this burden on the continent?
Yes, we are, through treatment. Treatment is becoming prevention. If you're on treatment, you are less likely to infect your partner. So we are looking at advocating for more optimal treatment, which people living with HIV will be able to take, and it will be easier for them to, for the treatment to absorb in their body. So people will be able to adhere. The more you adhere, the more you're on treatment, and the more now we'll be able to get to zero, because there'll be no new infections. Yes.
And when you look at these solutions or these experiments or types of research that is taking place in places like London, this was, to do with stem cell research, and as you've mentioned, a lot of cost implications for Africa. But is there a drive within the research world, the pharmaceutical world, to really create solutions that can address this problem in Africa, rather than spending more money on solutions that are not going to be able to help so many?
Yes, like I've said, we are looking now at investing on treatment and optimal treatment that a person will be able to take and will be able to adhere to. That will prevent now the new infections. In terms of other research, like I mentioned earlier, there is a process for searching for the cure, which again now is another level. But in terms of treatment, that is what we are focusing on in Africa.
All right, thank you so much. Jacqueline Mwangi joining us here from NEPAC. Now, in other news, a travesty of justice, unjustifiable and despicable. That's how top Zimbabwean government and ruling ZANU-PF officials have described U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to extend sanctions on the Southern African nation for yet another year. The United States claims the country's new government poses an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. foreign policy.
Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Information, Nick Mangwana, called the extension of the sanctions a travesty of justice against the people of Zimbabwe and says there seems to be a lack of consideration of their effects on ordinary citizens. Zimbabwe has long argued that the embargoes have adversely impacted social service delivery. 141 ZANU-PF-linked entities and individuals, including President Emmerson Mnangagwa, are subject to the sanctions. The ruling ZANU-PF has condemned their continued imposition.
This perpetuation of hostilities by the USA and other like-minded countries is unjustifiable, despicable, and contemptible, to say the least, as it comes against clear efforts by the government of Zimbabwe towards the implementation of its national reform agenda, including engagement and a re-engagement policy.
Despite the setback, it says it will continue to try to normalize relations with the West.
Our policy is to continue with the engaging and the re-engagement to those who are interested. We're not at war with anybody. We're a very peace-loving country. And all we're saying is that the new dispensation creates an opportunity for all peace-loving people to work together and move forward.
The U.S. has demanded democratic and economic reforms to lift the punitive measures. ZANU-PF insists it's made remarkable progress in that regard, including the holding of a vastly improved and widely endorsed election in July 2018. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
And let's go to Burkina Faso now, where the country is facing unprecedented displacement triggered by armed groups and intercommunal clashes. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, more than 100,000 people have been uprooted from their homes, 70,000 of them just in the past 2 months. Here's CGTN's Noel Makubu with the details.
The United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says 1.2 million people in Burkina Faso have been in dire need of assistance as of February this year. Many of them lack access to food, water and proper sanitation. OCHA's spokesperson says Burkina Faso's Sahel, North, North Centre and Eastern regions are the most affected areas. As a result, in December, the government declared a state of emergency in 14 provinces.
So it is intercommunal clashes between communities, and laid over that is this emergence of armed groups, which are fighting each other, fighting government forces and attacking civilians. That has escalated in the second half of last year, and really it took off at the beginning of this year with some very violent clashes in the beginning of January.
The humanitarian alert coincides with a visit to the landlocked West African country by the UN Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, Ulsa Mula. Ulsa insists that more must be done to meet the growing needs.
Around 120,000 people have no access to medical care, and some 670,000 people are at risk of food insecurity. 130,000 people are threatened by severe acute malnutrition this year, and their schools have closed, depriving almost 150,000 people, children, of their education.
This week, the UN Central Emergency Response Fund allocated $4 million to boost urgent assistance to internally displaced persons, people in host communities, and provide services for more than 15,000 women and girls. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he's deeply disappointed by the Burundian government's decision to shut down the UN Human Rights Office in the country. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, announced that the UN Human Rights Office in Burundi was closed down last Thursday at the insistence of the government. The government suspended all cooperation with the office in Burundi in 2016, and that was in reaction to a report by the UN independent investigators established by the UN Human Rights Council.
Since 2016, the government, in reaction to a report by the UN independent investigation, suspended all cooperation with the office in Burundi. Ms. Bachelet said her office would continue to explore other ways to work to shed light on human rights concerns and support the advocacy and promotion and protection of human rights in Burundi. For his part, the Secretary General was deeply disappointed by the decision to close down the Human Rights Office. The Secretary General also very much believes that the government of Burundi should engage with the High Commissioner's Office regarding the human rights situation in the country.
Dozens of Egypt's brightest minds have competed in the 4th Egyptian Robot Challenge. The annual student competition aims to select the best robotic projects in numerous categories to represent Egypt globally. The winners from this year's national competition will fly to China this August to compete on an international level at the World Robot Challenge held in Beijing.
200 Egyptian students have gathered in Cairo from all over the country, excited to put the robots to the ultimate domestic test. Robo Challenge Egypt is part of a global chain of competitions that has been introduced here since 2016. 50 teams have clashed in 10 different categories to prove they have the best intelligent machine in the nation.
We have teams that come from all over Egypt, and that creates an opportunity to expose kids to how different Egyptian cultures deal with robotics challenges. They're facing the same problem, but each team solves it in a different way. This way, they learn something new, and this develops a caliber of young Egyptians who have great experience with robotics.
Egypt is creating a fertile environment to support students in learning robotic technologies. The current creations are not so fascinating, but Egypt hopes such programs would build the talent needed for the future. Their tasks are maybe simple for now, to make robots walk, follow the line or fight. Hopefully soon they'd be able to build real solutions for the Egyptian society.
My school always gives us projects that provide solutions for Egypt's challenges. Our mission was to create smart robotic irrigation systems that induce the exact volume of water in the soil which the plant needs. We had to create methods for robots to realize this and act accordingly.
This is my first participation in the challenge. I entered a program called Ideas Gym. They taught us how to build robots months ago. The journey I took to participate in this competition made me learn a lot. I learned electricity, motor operation, how to use ultrasonic and infrared sensors to accomplish a specific task.
From 7 to 19 years old, these youngsters' devotion and passion cannot be hidden. Up till the last second before their battle, they keep coding to modify their little robots, and they have to follow strict rules to win.
We want to challenge our children so they learn about robotic technologies. We adopt all international regulations in our national competitions, so that way when they travel, they will be prepared to participate in the expected manner.
The winners in this domestic challenge will soon go through a thrilling experience. Carrying the Egyptian flag, they will represent their country in the World Robot Challenge scheduled this August in Beijing. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, time for a short break. Your business news up next. Coming up, Zimbabwe opens up fuel imports to private companies to stem a supply crisis. And South Africa names a new technical team to review Eskom's distribution capacity.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In Zimbabwe, the government has allowed private companies with free funds to import fuel for their own consumption. The decision was arrived at a cabinet meeting. Zimbabwe is seeking to ease a fuel supply crisis that has been caused by a lack of dollars. The move is expected to increase supply in the market. The cabinet has at the same time resolved to fast-track the ongoing partial privatization of the Zimbabwe United Passenger Company. Individuals will, however, not be allowed to import fuel under the new directive. South Africa's Public Enterprises Ministry has appointed a new technical review team to investigate a host of issues at the embattled power utility, Eskom. The 11-member team, consisting of engineering experts, is expected to conduct a full operations audit at all of Eskom's power stations within 4 weeks. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with the details.
It follows a meeting recently where Godan and Mining Minister Gwede Mantashe met mining executives and large Eskom clients to plot a way forward. But not everyone thinks it's a good idea.
You now have the original task team that was established in December by the President and the Leader of Government Business. You then have a task team that the President established that's an inter-ministerial task team. You then have a task team that's established within Eskom and its board itself. And then you have 8 engineers that we've imported from Italy who are also here to do a certain something that we're not sure of. Now, no one wants to tell us exactly what they're doing. What we do know is this: everyone is operating in silos, if you'll pardon the pun, so they have their own boiler rooms, and we don't know if they're reporting to the same head office.
The utility has been through a rough period, with load shedding being the order of the day, and consumers are bracing themselves for more bad news from the regulator.
The crisis is not being averted in any which way, shape or form. And the fact of the matter is there is a very good chance that on Thursday, you and I are going to be paying a lot more for electricity while these task teams continue to operate in their silos with a shroud of secrecy over them.
As it stands, plans are being made to break the utility up into 3 units. Another option, though, has been put forward.
I would immediately start the separation of Eskom. I would split it into 2 separate entities. I would create a transmission entity where the South African public retain control of the grid because I think it's a good national asset. And I would separate generation. The first thing I would do is I would start introducing independent power producers onto my generation. And as we moved along and as supply became more readily available, I would start selling off power stations to municipalities that had the ability to control those power stations and to run them effectively.
Eskom management has not been available for comment on progress being made to stabilise electricity supply since the first presidential task team was appointed in December.
The National Union of Mine Workers agrees that there are too many task teams and it's going to lead to confusion. They're calling it a recipe for disaster. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's go to Tunisia now. Since 2011, the country has been facing an economic crisis which has affected many vital sectors. But car dealers are now frustrated by the increased cost of importing vehicles, which has caused a drop in vehicle sales. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi with more.
According to the president of the car dealers' unions, sales revenues dropped between 10% to 15%. The numbers of cars being imported has reduced after value-added tax was increased.
The situation is critical. A 30% reduction in the import quota between 2017 and 2018, a 25% increase in the consumption tax rate on imported vehicles, coupled with 19% rise in VAT, affected the sector. We are losing money.
Dibbish added that import quota for 2018 was 45,000 cars. He called on the government and the Ministry of Trade to increase the quota.
We're importing 25% fewer cars than in 2017. Professionals are facing an unprecedented crisis. The prices of vehicles have skyrocketed and a number of available cars dropped. The state must intervene as soon as possible.
The trade union of car dealers warned that the decline of disposable income for millions of Tunisian consumers pushed sales down. People are complaining about the skyrocketing price of cars in the North African state.
Buying a new car is a dream for many people. Getting a car credit is very expensive.
I'm taking care of my old car because I don't have the financial means to buy a new one. In the past, it was easy to change the vehicle. Now it's impossible.
2 weeks ago, the executive board of the Central Bank of Tunisia raised its benchmark rate by 100 basis points from 6.75% to 7.75%. Analysts believe that car demand will drop again in 2019 due to more interest rate hikes. The trade union of car dealers has warned that the depreciation of the Tunisian dinar against the dollar and euro has ruined many businesses. Economists assert that the dinar will continue its depreciation against foreign currencies. Consequently, the cost of importing and selling cars will be much higher in the next few months. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Uganda is losing 8% of its forests each year. And according to the Forest Authority, much of that loss is due to the demand for firewood and charcoal to burn in traditional stoves. One Kampala entrepreneur has developed a new clean energy solution that may reduce Uganda's dependence on firewood and charcoal for cooking by using rocks and the sun. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga with more.
It's a high-tech solution to a decades-old problem.
The technology is we introduce the oxygen into the rocks, which makes it burn more efficiently.
These workers are assembling clean energy stoves that use volcanic rocks and solar panels instead of the firewood and charcoal burnt in traditional cook stoves in Uganda.
This is something that is different from a normal charcoal stove. Charcoal stoves use purely charcoal. Firewood stove use purely firewood. Yet the eco stove use volcanic rocks which are reusable.
The eco stove is connected to a solar battery which drives the fan in the stove, helping to ignite the fire. That's a big change from the thick smoke in the homes of people who cook with firewood and charcoal. Smoke that's been linked to a number of respiratory health problems. Rebecca Chiwanuka started using the eco stove 4 years ago. She's concerned about doing her part to save the environment for her children and grandchildren, and she's also concerned about saving money.
It is very economical because ever since that time I've not bought any sack of charcoal. I just use the small particles of charcoal, the rusenyente. And also it is very fast. It's like a gas cooker.
It takes about 30 minutes for Chiwanuka to prepare a meal on the eco stove. She says it's much more cost-effective, saving her 85% of the money she would have spent on charcoal. The stove is designed to do more than just cook a meal. Millions of Ugandans live without access to electricity.
As a complete unit, you light your home, charge your phone, cook your meal at the same time as you listen to an FM radio.
A fully installed eco stove unit costs about $240 US. But as Uganda continues to lose hundreds of thousands of hectares of forest area, thousands of Ugandans are choosing to invest in a stove powered by rocks and the sun. Hilara Isiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Let's take a short break now. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, writers seek inspiration at a desert retreat in Egypt.
When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Do you see fast-growing, endless deserts and parched earth? Or do you see the biggest opportunity for an agricultural revolution in a generation? Do you see crowded, unplanned cities or vast, untapped markets? Do you see a population at risk, or do you see a billion-strong opportunity to grow the next wave of multi-billion-dollar firms in Africa? When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. We start in Egypt now, where a secluded retreat helps writers develop coping mechanisms and find fresh perspective. Writers come to escape the pressures of city life and find inspiration in the desert. Support from the community helps them to overcome their creative blocks and other challenges to their craft. CGTN's Brian Toussaint reports.
A dozen writers have made their way to a desert town outside of Cairo. At a writer's retreat, they escape the hustle and bustle of city life to get intimate with their writing. The seclusion and slower pace helps them to overcome writer's block or a creative slowdown.
This is why we are doing the Writers' Retreat. The Writing Retreat tackles the psychological and life challenges that a writer may face. These challenges are many.
Here, authors and novelists can express themselves without criticism. Anyone can attend the retreat as long as they have a passion and the ability to write.
I love writing. I do not like reading, but I like writing and expressing what is inside me. This is beneficial for me because I want to bring to others what is in me. I find it soothing. I want to bring out all my ideas and have them in front of me.
I want to discover this other side of me. I came because of writer's block, which is what the founder of the retreat, Huda Anwar, talks about. I feel that the place is encouraging. This is my first time in Wadi Al Natroun, so I am very excited about the place.
Novelist Huda Anwar created the three-day getaway after rediscovering her own motivation in nature. She overcame her writer's block after traveling to the city of St. Catherine at the foot of Mount Sinai. Each of the previous 12 retreats took place at a different location in Egypt.
I understood the value of the effect of places on writing, from my trips to St. Catherine, my travels to the mountains and to places that have no artificial aspects whatsoever has had an effect on me, which made me realize the effect that such places would have on other people.
Writers take part in group readings and share personal experiences. Almost 100 writers have attended the retreat since their inception in 2017. Between them, they have published 20 books and even formed a support group for newcomers. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Let's go to Morocco now, where a mountaineer has become the first female in the country to scale the 7 peaks of the world's continents. She hopes to inspire other girls to conquer their fears and achieve their dreams. Gono has more.
I am really very proud and very happy to be able to achieve this great challenge and to become the first person in Morocco to achieve this challenge of the 7 summits of the world.
At the age of 26, Boukra Baibano climbed the highest peak in Morocco, Toubkal. Since then, she had traveled the globe to climb each of the continent's highest mountains, conquering the 4,897 meters. Her determination has seen her reach the summit of Antarctica's Mount Vinson.
With will, with a lot of perseverance, one can even achieve dreams as big as to climb Everest and to achieve a challenge like climbing the 7 summits of the world.
She continues to support the fight on violence against women and girls.
I don't identify as feminist. I think of myself as a person more than a woman. I am a normal person who managed to seize her chance, who worked on herself to make something of herself, to realize her dreams.
Her mountaineering passion has required a lot of financial support.
The key figures of this great adventure of the 7 summits for 8 years from 2011 until the end of 2018 are about 43,000 vertical meters climbed and about 2 million dirhams spent on the project.
Boukra Baibano hopes to inspire women to believe in themselves.
I hope to be a role model, especially for young girls, so that they too dare to make something of themselves, to believe in themselves, to believe in a dream.
As well as doing community work, Baibano gives talks in schools and universities around the country. She's also campaigning to develop mountain tourism in Morocco. Gono, CGTN.
Well, time now for a short break. Your sports news up next. Coming up, holders Real Madrid knocked out of the UEFA Champions League by Ajax Amsterdam.
Africa Live. Find your voice.